My name's Tom Cloer. I'm Professor Emeritus from Furman University. I grew up in Southern Appalachia, and I'm going to tell a story that involves all my ancestors, on my maternal ancestors. And it's a gruesome story. It's a story about a young female teenage mother who was woefully poor and had such humble upbringings, and she was hanged. She was hanged in the town of Morganton in the year 1833. All of my Howell ancestors were her neighbors. My mom's name was my mom's grandmother was Fanny Jane Howell. Fanny Jane Howell. My mom was Fanny Grace Cloer. She was a namesake of Fanny Jane Howell. And it's the Howells that are so critically involved in this bizarre killing. They were all neighbors. They were neighbors to the Silver family. Charles Silver was the one that was killed and dismembered and burned. The Stewarts were neighbors, and the Stewarts was Barbara Howell Stewart and Isaiah Stewart, the mother and father of Frankie Stewart. Since, of course, they were neighbors, to use the term, the Elizabethan term that was used then was they started sparking. And when they started sparking, it wasn't long till they married. They married at, Frankie was 17, Frankie was 14, and Charles was 17 when they married. It was a trouble marriage from the beginning. 1 year after they were married, their little girl Nancy was born. And Charles enjoyed Mountain Dew, very strong drink, and he would become an abuser of Frankie and of the Mountain Dew. He also had a wandering eye and sowed a lot of wild oats. Very abusive. The words brutal, the words cruel were used in describing his abuse of Frankie. So what happened? It was Christmas, 1831, and Frankie had been working all day, and Charles, now there are two versions. I'll give Charles's version first. The Silver family say to this day that the reason she killed him was because of jealousy. He had a wandering eye, everybody knew that. And he used a lot of strong drink, and he was sleeping, and she killed him by cutting him in the head with an axe. The family story, the Stewart family story, was that he came in drunk and started again abusing Frankie, and Frankie grabbed an axe when he said he was loading his gun to kill her and the baby, and she swung at him. Accidentally, I think she hit him exactly where it would kill him. Well, now what would one do if one were in a situation like that? Woefully illiterate, by the way, and unknowing in terms of the law in America. A baby wailing and a dead husband bleeding on her feet. She went to her parents. And then everything that I've ever found as to decisions made were wrong decisions by everybody, of course including Frankie. The next thing that happened after being poorly prepped, she went to Charles's family. And she says, has anybody seen Charles? He went off hunting and he's not come back home, and I'm worried. I need to try to find out where he is. Well, then the Young family was called upon. Youngs were neighbors, and it was a hunting buddy of Charles, and they said, well, we haven't seen Charles in weeks. We don't know what this is about. What are you talking about? Well, old man Silver, who was an illiterate preacher, by the way, and was well known, he began to get suspicious and called in the sheriff. The sheriff came in, found some blood spots all over the floor, and he noticed something because he pulled up a board and there was a charred body part. There were several charred body parts, one being a heel that had my great-great-great-uncle's heel iron attached. Now, there wasn't any DNA, of course, in 1831. But if they could prove that that heel iron belonged to Charles Silver, that'd be pretty strong. So the sheriff immediately arrested Frankie, Barbara Howell, Stewart, the mother of Frankie, and a brother named Blackstone for disposing of evidence, and that's important to know. The mother and a brother of Frankie, I don't think Frankie ever went back to the cabin after she went to her parents. I don't think she ever went back. Well, the trial. Who was to be called in the trial? The trial came later in May, and Frankie never got a chance to tell her story. You say, how in the world could that happen? Her lawyer, who was inept, had her plead not guilty. Well, under the old common English common law then, if you said you're not guilty, you didn't get a chance to say anything. All she had to do was plead guilty and tell her story, and she would have been set free, says people like Sam Irvin, the colorful North Carolina senator. Well, after 2 days, now it only lasted 2 days. After 2 days, the jury said they were deadlocked with 9 in favor of acquitting, and 3 in favor of saying guilty. So they called back in my Howell ancestor, Thomas Howell. My four-great-grandfather was one of the witnesses that said there was a smell in the air that was very, very strong around Christmas. Smelled like meat, flesh burning. So they're listed on all the documents, the Howells are. Then Thomas Howell, my 4 great uncles, was called back in to make sure that they understood what he is saying, that he made that iron, heel iron, spur, and made it for Charles Silver. Well, Thomas came back in, and then the jury, he must have been very outright and saying, I know that's my heel iron, because there was no delay in all 12 saying guilty. Now, she was put in prison, but her mother now and Blackstone never spent any time in jail, because the sheriff had to turn them loose because he couldn't prove anything on them about them disposing of evidence. Well, the trial was 2 days, but her term in a dungeon was 17 months in a dungeon. 17 months. And the only time she had any freedom is when she escaped and got to another county before she was finally found and brought back and executed. Well, how did she fare in the dungeon? She was sick most of the time. And when people first heard that she had killed him when he was lying down with Nancy, the baby on his breast, they were horrified that she had gone up and whacked him with an axe. And then the cutting up with the axe a human body and burning it, she ought to hang. But they never got to hear Frankie's side of the story until the appeals. And when the appeals started, everybody started hearing that Frankie was in fact brutalized by this man and was acting in self-defense. It's an interesting thing to me that 157 men signed a document saying she ought to be pardoned. All of my Howell ancestors, including Thomas, including my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was the neighbor that smelled the pungent smell, all of them said, including 7 jurors, that she ought to be pardoned because they didn't know that she had been acting in self-defense. Well, the only way then for her to live was to escape. Her brother, Jackson, I think was, and I have it verified through documents, that Jackson helped her. He was a very bright boy. He ended up being high sheriff of Mitchell County, by the way. But I think he's the one that made the locks that opened all the doors without breaking anything, because he was a bright boy. And what amazes me is that they made it to another county, Rutherfordton, and she was walking along the side of hay. She had been under the hay, and the sheriff came up beside of her and said, "Frankie?" And she said, "No, my name's Tommy," because she had her hair cut short and had on men's clothing. And then an uncle that had unlimited potential for improvement in intelligence said, her name is Tommy. Well, the sheriff was no dummy, so he arrested them and off to jail she went. None of the others were ever arrested, just Frankie. The hanging. The hanging took place on a hot July day in 1833. 17 months since she was arrested. The women of Rutherfordton all were against the hanging, and they wanted her to have one pretty white dress before she was executed, so they gave her one, and she was executed in that dress. Then the family worried. I don't know what time they got the body, but they were worried, and they took off toward the mountains, and they got to worrying about decomposition. It was hot in July, and they had a long ride back to the mountains. One little boy saw a wagon stop at the DeVault farm and quickly put a wooden box in the ground and buried it, and then took off quickly. There was a monument erected there at the DeVault farm going north on Highway 26 north of Morganton. You can see the marker. It only had 2 errors. One that misspelled her name, and another one was it said she was the only woman that ever was hanged in Burke County. Burke County was where this all happened, and that was incorrect. Now, what would happen to the rest of the family? There's this curse on the Stewart family. Frankie's mother was bitten by a rattlesnake and died suffering horribly. Isaiah, the father, was cutting a chestnut tree and it fell on him and killed him. Blackstone was hanged himself, the one that disposed of the body, for stealing a mule. And Jackson was killed by a group of Union sympathizers, and that's created much folklore about the curse on the Stewart family. Now, ending, what would somebody say, a jury say today, if same case came before them and they had a good lawyer? I think it would probably be Frankie would be cited for not telling about her family practicing cremation without the proper license. Thank you, and I've got two things I hope you will consider reading. The Untold Story of Frankie Silver, I think, is one of the better books about this. It's by Perry Dean Young. Perry Dean Young is the same family of the hunting friend of Charles Silver. And my two articles are in May Pickens Courier. There's my Howell ancestors' home in what was then Burke County, now Yancey County, and the Ballad of Frankie Silver. I hope you enjoy reading. Thank you very much.
I swept my glory all away. My sun goes down, my days are past, and I must leave this world at last. Judge Daniels has my sentence passed. These prison walls I leave at last. Nothing to cheer my drooping head until I'm numbered with the dead. His feeble hands fell gently down. His chattering tongue soon lost its sound. Its striking terror into my heart to see his soul and body part. This awful ghost I know I'll see, or his flesh in misery. His flaming eyes will say to me, why did you take my life away? Awful indeed to think of death, in perfect health to lose my breath. little time to pray to God.